Reverend Dr. Sid Mohn. Sid's an old friend, so I'm delighted to be part of the program with him. Sid became president of the Heartland Alliance for Human Needs and Human Rights in 1980. So here to introduce him as a member of the board of directors of the Chicago Sunday Evening Club, John Davidoff. John is the founder and CEO of Davidoff Communications, a strategic marketing firm here in Chicago that works with a range of clients from Fortune 500 companies to nonprofits, large and small. So please join me in welcoming John Davidoff.
Good morning. It is my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, the Reverend Dr. Sid Mohn. Sid is the president and CEO of the Heartland Alliance for Human Needs and Human Rights, an anti-poverty human rights organization he has been leading since 1980. Sid's ordained as a United Church of Christ clergy person and identified early in his religious life the concept of worker priest and chose to exercise his worker priest vocation through service to a non-sectarian organization that espouses human rights values aligned with faith-based principles. He has demonstrated dedication to those principles in his leadership of Heartland Alliance, and his passion and his vision has inspired many of us to care about and act on issues that impact the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized. Sid's dedication to social justice and faith to action has taken many paths. Early in the 1980s, Sid was one of a group of clergy that provided training to hospital chaplains and the faith-based community to facilitate inclusion of people with HIV/AIDS. He was instrumental as a leader in the Chicago Sanctuary movement that took bold action to protect Central Americans fleeing violence and persecution in their homelands. Through connection to other concerned Chicagoans active in the sanctuary community, he helped found the Midwest Immigrants' Rights Center, inspiring bold individual and collective action by the Chicago legal community in support of asylum seekers fleeing torture and persecution. In 3 decades, the Midwest Immigrant Rights Center has grown to be the nationally recognized National Immigrant Justice Center, a vanguard of federal impact litigation, advocacy, and service delivery. Sid has also helped bring the vision of the Kovler Center for the treatment of survivors of torture of life, creating a space where justice, healing, and hope created a possibility for transformation. Sid's combination of bold vision and dedication to these worker priest ideals inspired countless moments of change and action on behalf of the most vulnerable and marginalized. Under his leadership, Heartland Alliance has become a great incubator for social justice causes, launching organizations such as the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, the National Association of Latin American and Caribbean Communities, the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, numerous refugee mutual aid associations, the Midwest Coalition for Human Rights, and the Illinois Poverty Summit. Reverend Mohn has been a tireless advocate on behalf of LGBT populations throughout the globe, most recently through the establishment of Heartland's Global Initiative for Sexuality and Human Rights and through the work of Heartland Alliance International. I met Sid in 1988. I started doing pro bono advertising for Heartland Alliance, and I'm proud to be completing, I think, my 25th year of service on one of their boards of directors. Back when I met Sid in 1988, he had 150 employees and about a $15 million operating budget. Today, Sid leads an employee base of 1,400 employees, about a $100 million operating budget with programs in 16 different countries. Sid is to me, to Chicago, to the region, and to the world, a leader, particularly to the oppressed of the oppressed. He is, in fact, that worker priest. He has been to me and so many a rabbi. He is a visionary, an exceptionally caring and big-hearted worker and servant. We are very honored to have him as our keynote speaker this morning. Please welcome the Reverend Dr. Sid Mohn.
Chicago, 1880. National media describes Chicago as the fastest growing city in the world. Business is booming. The fire is over. Preparations are in full swing for the World's Columbian Exposition. City Hall is proud. But there's an underbelly to it all. There's a handful of leaders concerned about building a city of values, not just a city of economic prowess. New reformist voices are emerging at the community level, bringing new ideas, a fresh look at instilling a commitment to building a city for all. It was at this time that the roots of the Chicago Sunday Evening Club and the roots of the Heartland Alliance for Human Needs and Human Rights were planted by new thinkers with a commitment to building a city of collaboration and compassion. Clifford Barnes, an idealist graduate of Yale Divinity School, came to Chicago to do innovative work through the YMCA. Influenced by student movements in Paris, his concepts of religious education in the marketplace began to evolve. He interacted with Jane Addams, each influencing the other to address the challenges of this, our great American city. His work evolved into the novel experiment that is now the legacy of the Chicago Sunday Evening Club. Heartland Alliance, which I serve, just concluded celebrating its 125th anniversary, tracing our founding to 1888. It was founded as a result of city leaders recognizing that while the economic engines of commerce were churning at high speed, there were still populations left behind or completely left out of the economic surge of the times. A decision was made that an organization needed to be founded to attend to the needs of populations that were not benefiting from the city's largesse. And thus the foundation of Heartland Alliance was laid. And from that beginning, a fertile movement of collaboration was started, resulting in a merger with Jane Addams' League for the Protection of Immigrants, and mergers with Jewish, Catholic, and Protestant protectorates. An early experiment in bringing together differing sectarian efforts into a collaborative, non-sectarian movement. We were one of the earliest interfaith efforts in articulating a common cause, a new model for a booming city. This new model is also manifest in the new mission and revised programming of the contemporary Chicago Sunday Evening Club. Jane Addams, mother of professional social work, gained her inspiration from her work with the poor at Toynbee Hall in London. And she birthed the Chicago Settlement Center movement based on direct services to newcomers and to people living in poverty. That direct service knowledge ultimately led Addams to focus her leadership on local and national social policy in order to provide solutions, not just charitable responses, to critical needs. Adams introduced social research as a professional discipline, as an essential bedrock to undergird social policy, advocacy, and public systems reform. From immigrant protections to child labor to banking practice to juvenile corrections to women's rights, Jane Addams birthed a plethora of social justice initiatives. Towards the end of her career, she became dedicated to the role of Chicago within the global community and the need to prevent forced migration, migration that ultimately manifested itself in the neighborhoods of our city. As the first Secretary General of the International Women's Peace League, a position that qualified her to be the first female Nobel Peace Prize winner, she was vilified here in our own backyard for being too much of a social activist. She was reprimanded in the public media for not knowing her place and for not concentrating her efforts in Chicago's own backyard. Addams, however, was convinced that unaddressed issues of global conflict would end up being issues in Chicago's neighborhoods. Heartland Alliance is proud of its early roots, watered by late 19th century leaders, nourished by Jane Addams, with resulting branches that touch local and global skies. Today, as a human rights organization, Heartland Alliance is active in more than 16 countries, committed to being a service-based and change-focused leader. Our purposes are laser-like and challenging: ending poverty, ensuring safety for those in danger, and building a world of human rights. Our issues are those that are most perplexing to our society, from unaccompanied child migration to chronic homelessness, from persistent extreme poverty to human trafficking, from local violence to global violence. Guided by social research and policy advocacy, we endeavor to keep alive our progressive origins in similar ways that the Chicago Sunday Evening Club endeavors to keep a progressive frontline presence. But all of this is preamble to the challenges of our day. Locally and globally, faith-based dogma regrettably seems to do more to divide us than it does to unite us. The Chicago Sunday Evening Club is trying to change that. The non-sectarian, or perhaps pan-sectarian Heartland Alliance is trying to change that. We at Heartland Alliance are often critiqued for our work, and at times by faith-based groups, whether it be our work on behalf of immigrants in the United States or our work with the African Commission on Peoples and Human Rights to advance LGBT human rights, or our work to bridge sectarian divides and protect religious and social minorities in Iraq. While there are sectarian groups that oppose us based on dogma, there are also sectarian groups that support us based on dogma. But I'd like to propose that our founders, Barnes and Addams, would encourage us to move beyond dogma, which often defaults to dividing us, and that we focus more on practice, which has the potential to unite us. All of us in this room are all too aware of divisive local and global forces that are based on differing credos. What evangelical Christians believe versus what progressive Christians believe, what Christians believe versus what Jews believe versus what Muslims believe, what Buddhists and Hindus and the myriad of other faith traditions believe, what fundamentalists versus mainstream versus liberal practitioners of all faith traditions believe. Within the past 2 decades, we've seen the enigmatic rise of fundamentalist Buddhist movements espousing and exercising violence. Historic divides between Sunnis and Shias and Sufis have become a conflagration point for much of the Middle East. And U.S. politics, as expressed in our November elections, continue to reflect our own inter and intra-religious divides. Many are the faith-based bodies who claim they have the true faith. Theirs is the way to the heavenly realm or to enlightenment or to fulfillment. Now, I don't want to dismiss the value of statements of belief or the work of theology or the power of creeds. They're a part of our legacy, a tradition we pass on, a basis for our learning the rudiments of faith. But at times, these creedal statements trap us, serving as the definitive balance weight by which other belief statements are evaluated. Some measure up, others don't. Does your faith creed measure up to my faith creed approach? Is contrasted to an experience I had about 5 years ago. I was seated on the shore of the Sea of Galilee with a diverse group of people from differing faiths. The leader of our reflection that bright, cloudless morning announced that we would be developing our own creed for our particular group in our particular moment. It would be our creed, uniquely ours, comprised by all those gathered on that shore. Each of us offered our contribution by personally finishing this statement, I believe. And each of us offered a different response. And each response was precious in and of itself. And together they became a creedal symphony, a harmonic blending of each of us without a negation of a single note. Unfortunately, such experiences are rare. What is more common is our historic and contemporary quest for orthodoxy. Martin Luther King Jr. encouraged us to move away from such a place, to move away from that which divides us, and to find a common bond in a common agenda. In his brilliant World House speech entitled, "Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community?" he wrote that a widely separated family inherits a house in which they all have to live together. This, King writes, is the great problem of humankind. We have inherited a large house, a great world house, in which we have to live together, black and white, Easterner and Westerner, Gentile and Jew, Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, and Hindu, a family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interest, who, because we can never again live apart, must somehow learn to live together in peace. Today, our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenges of our change. the large house in which we live demands that we transform the worldwide neighborhood into a worldwide brotherhood and sisterhood. Together we must learn to live as brothers and sisters, or together we will perish as fools. King goes on in that powerful speech with very specific challenges as to how we build this necessary world house. One, wiping out all vestiges of racism. Two, engaging in an all-out effort against poverty. And three, building a world of peace. It seems to me that King is suggesting that the future of our planet depends not on advancement of orthodox thinking, but rather on the articulation of orthopraxy. That is, what are the shared practices, the shared commitments that are essential to our humanity, and yet, yes, also essential to our worship of the divine. This view is certainly a familiar one to me. My Protestant upbringing was intertwined with scriptural passages such as faith without works is dead, being alone. By their works you will know them. Love God, love your neighbor. Care for the stranger, feed the hungry, visit the imprisoned, attend to the sick. I'm a professed member of the Order of Ecumenical Franciscans, the newest of the Franciscan orders, and one that seeks to be inclusive in combining first and third order concepts, men and women, LGBT people, and all expressions of Christian faith. In addition to the spirituality of Francis and Clare, that which keeps the ecumenical Franciscans connected to each other and to the rest of the Catholic and Anglican Franciscan family is a threefold bedrock commitment: peacemaking, care for creation, concern for the poor. A three-point orthopraxy, so to speak, that unites us amidst our differing life and faith perspectives and also focuses us. The Catholic Secular Order of Franciscans has embedded in its rule a similar orthopraxy: respect for all people and all creatures, dedication to justice, being joyful peacemakers, serving the poor and oppressed, and embracing a simple lifestyle. St. Francis, inspirer of Franciscan orders, is often attributed to the statement, "Preach the gospel, use words only if you must." To be precise, his actual documented words were, "All the friars should preach by their deeds." It seems to me that in an age of consumerism, ongoing and emerging war, social marginalization, persistent discrimination relative to race, gender, sexual orientation, nationality, that both King's vision of a world house and the Franciscan precepts for doing holiness are spot-on relevant. Michael Lerner, progressive rabbi and interlocutor with progressive faith traditions, wrote in his summer 2014 Tikkun publication that God is all that makes the transformation from that which is to that which can and ought to be. That can and ought to be, according to Rabbi Lerner's faith framework, includes the following: a world based on love, caring, kindness, generosity, joyful celebration with awe, wonder, radical amazement at the grandeur and mystery of our universe, social and economic justice, peace and nonviolence, living in harmony with the earth and with each other, playfully celebrating our freedom and the development of our understanding of ourselves and of our world. Wow, a litany of orthopraxy, astonishingly similar to the social justice espoused by Brother Martin and by Father Francis and Sister Claire. Other Jewish scholars support this perspective in more traditional language. The basic injunctions of the Torah are understood to be loving the stranger, seeking justice, pursuing peace, protecting the earth, treating everyone with kindness and open-hearted generosity. Roger Cohen, in an October 2014 New York Times op-ed, reflected on attending High Holy Days celebrations in London, where he decried the lack of sermons on the death of children in Palestine and Israel, where he claimed there should be a concern irrespective of political or religious views. In Cohen's words, throughout the diaspora, the millennia of being strangers in strange lands, Jews' restless search in the scriptures for the ethics contained in sacred words formed a transmission belt in Judaism. The terrible thing about the Holy Land today, Cohen writes, is the denial of humanity to the stranger. When that goes, so does essential self-interrogation. For as long as the shared humanity of the other is perceived and felt, such questioning is unavoidable. The words of Leviticus are worth repeating. Treat the stranger as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. An expressive interpretation of that much quoted, the test of a society is the way it cares for its strangers, or its other iterations, or the way it cares for its poor, or what it does for its children, or for its elderly, or for its minorities, or for its infirm. Islam is often referenced as a faith tradition of orthopraxy, lacking a monolithic orthodoxy. I'm not expert enough to enter that debate, but Islam, based on 5 pillars, most of which include an action or a duty, as contrary to a cradle belief. It's a well-known hadith: to know but not to act is not to know. Some Muslim writers assert that in Islam there is no such thing as justice that is not rooted in social action. Here's a sampling of supporting Quranic statements. The wealthy are to share their resources with the poor. Believers are committed to justice, al-adl, because God in very nature is a loving God of justice. Righteousness is not just belief in God. It is help to widows and orphans, care for the poor and travelers, liberation of the enslaved. People of God should be tolerant, not striving against each other, because Allah is ultimately responsible for the rich diversity of culture worldwide. The historic and faith-central Imam Ali is often quoted for his summarizing statement, "If a person is a devout worshiper of Allah, we should judge him and her for their view and their behavior." During the month of April, Hindus celebrate the birth of honor, dharma, and bhakti. Dharma being the almost untranslatable concept of one's duty to the right way of living. As part of those festivities, many people participate in festivals of seva, or community service, as an expression of selfless service to all. The concept of seva is multifaceted. Some Hindus think of it in terms of achieving a selfless state, while others think of it as giving to those who are less fortunate. Lama Zopa Rinpoche bridged this false divide in his quote, "All the peace and happiness of the whole globe, the peace and happiness of societies, the peace and happiness of family, the peace and happiness of the individual person's life, and the peace and happiness even of animals, all depends on having loving kindness towards each other." Buddhism, as a non-monolithic tradition, recognizes that suffering is our common lot and compassion should be our common response. As individuals are successful in Buddhist practice, self-ego is supplanted by compassion for all. Natural compassion becomes just who one is. It's wonderfully clear that the Abrahamic Sarah Hagar religious traditions have promising scriptural and theological underpinnings to pave a path to a unifying orthopraxy. Hinduism and Buddhism both reflect concepts of selfless service and innate compassion towards all, providing a bridge to a unifying interfaith orthopraxy. Remember about 20 years ago being on the National Steering Committee for a Ford Foundation project looking at promising practices around the nation relative to strengthening intergroup relations. The two-year project determined that the most effective initiatives were those in which groups of African Americans, Latinos, whites, and Asians came together for a shared concern, such as the need for better schools or more affordable housing. These efforts were much more promising than getting to know you initiatives. When differing people focused on common concern, their differences became secondary to the common cause. The final report on that project was entitled "Together in Our Differences." We, as people of faith, need to write the sequel to that report. Perhaps in this dawn of the 21st century, we as people of differing faith traditions need to advance an alternative to the credo concepts that have defined our separate faith traditions and bred dividing and polarizing views of orthodoxy. Instead of a focus on I believe, with all the divisions that has come to imply, perhaps, just perhaps, we should explore concepts of faccio, I do, I act, we do, we act, that have the potential for unifying people of all faiths into a conjoined commitment to building a better world of justice and hope. Pope Francis, in his post-mortem speech after the October Extraordinary Synod on the Family, a convocation with great debate as to the orthodoxy of the Church, referenced the Church as, and I quote, not being afraid to roll up her sleeves to pour oil and wine on people's wounds. A church who doesn't see humanity as a house of glass to judge or categorize people. It is the church that is not afraid to eat and drink with prostitutes and publicans. The church that has its doors wide open to receive the needy, the penitent, and not only the just or those who believe they are perfect. Pope Francis appears to be lending his voice to that of Brother Martin and St. Francis and Rabbi Lerner and Imam Ali. Their voices blend in a chorus of Facciamos. We act together to end poverty, seek justice, protect the gift of all creation, build a world of peace. Chicago 2014, 125 years later. Chicago's endeavoring to recapture a global status. Economic engines, while not as strong as in the 1880s, are again beginning to chug with steam. Just as was 125 years ago, there's an underbelly. Income divides continue to expand. Hunger and homelessness seem intractable. Violence looms on a daily basis. Poverty, according to Heartland Alliance's Social Impact Research Center, has been static for the past decade, and the numbers of the extremely poor are rising. A growing economic sea is not lifting all boats. Racism, homophobia, xenophobia persistently raise their ugly head, and all too frequently with religious overlays. This is not the city that Adams and Barnes dreamed of more than 100 years ago. This is not the city of which we as people of faith dream. Now may be the time to introduce a unifying orthopraxy, our own statement of faccio. Faccio, facciamos, we act to end poverty. Facciamos, we act to overcome discrimination and social exclusion. Facciamos, we act to build communities of peace. Facciamos, we act to protect our environment. Let us in this room recommit to rebuilding a world-class city, one where violence and poverty are addressed head-on as signposts of our independent and interdependent faith traditions. Let's act to make sure we really are a world-class city where rich and poor, people of all faiths, genders, ethnicities, sexual orientations are welcomed, protected, and provided hope and opportunity and justice. Let's address the epidemic of fear that has spread with contagion throughout our city, our country, our world, a contagion that irrationally fears those with disease, or with difference. Instead of orthodoxic abuses that can all too easily lead to a holy war, let's focus on an orthopraxy that can lead all of us to a holy peace. Let's usher in a neo-faith generation committed to orthopraxy. Faccio, I act. Preach the good news of faith and use words only if you must. Credemos, we believe in a better city, a better for all. This can be our unifying creed. Facciamos, we act to end poverty and build societies of opportunity in this our city. Facciamos, we act to end discrimination and exclusion and to birth living together in a world house in this our city. Facciamos, we act to protect and preserve the dignity of all creation in this our city. Facciamos, we act to end violence and serve as peacemakers in this our city. It is our deeds that will write the next 100 years.